gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Durham, just so people remember what this is all about, let me ask you, the Mueller investigation revealed that Russia interfered in the 2016 election in sweeping and systemic fashion, correct?
That's correct.
And Russia did so through a social media campaign that favored Donald Trump and disparaged Hillary Clinton, correct?
As the report says, yes.
And Mueller found that a Russian intelligence service hacked computers associated with the Clinton campaign and then released the stolen documents publicly. Is that right?
That report speaks for itself as well.
Mueller also reported that though he could not establish the crime of conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt, he also said, quote, a statement that the investigation did not establish certain facts does not mean there was no evidence of those facts. That also appears in the report, doesn't it?
There's language to that effect, yes.
In fact, you cited that very statement in your own report, did you not, as a way of distinguishing between proof beyond a reasonable doubt and evidence that falls short of proof beyond a reasonable doubt?
Correct.
As an illustration of this, both Mueller and congressional investigations found that Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was secretly meeting with an operative linked to Russian intelligence named Konstantin Kilimnik, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And that Manafort, while chairman of the Trump campaign, gave that Russian intelligence operative the campaign's internal polling data, correct?
That's what I've read in the news, yes.
And that Manafort provided this information to Russian intelligence while Russian intelligence was engaged in that social media campaign and the release of stolen documents to help the Trump campaign, correct?
You may be getting beyond depth of my knowledge, but
well, let me say very simply, while Manafort, the campaign chairman for Donald Trump, was giving this Russian intelligence officer internal campaign polling data, Russian intelligence was helping the Trump campaign, weren't they?
I don't know that.
You really don't know those
right.
very basic facts of the investigation?
I know the general facts, yes. Do I know that particular fact myself? No. I mean, I know that I've read that in the media.
And are you aware, Mr. Durham, that Mueller and congressional investigations also revealed that Don Jr. was informed that a Russian official was offering the Trump campaign, quote, very high-level and sensitive information, unquote, that would be incriminating if Hillary Clinton was part of, quote, Russia and its government support of Mr. Trump? Are you aware of that?
Sure, people get phone calls all the time from individuals who claim to have information like that.
Really, the son of a presidential candidate gets calls all the time from a foreign government offering dirt on their opponent? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think this is unique in your experience.
So you have other instances of the Russian government offering dirt on a presidential candidate to the presidential candidate's son. Is that what you're saying?
Would you repeat the question?
You said that it's not uncommon to get offers of help from a hostile foreign government in a presidential campaign directed at the president's son. You really stand by that, Mr. Durham?
I'm saying that people can make phone calls making claims all the time that you may have experienced.
Are you really trying to diminish the significance of what happened here and the secret meeting that the president's son set up in Trump Tower to receive that incriminating information? Are you trying to diminish the significance of that, Mr. Durham?
I'm not trying to diminish it at all, but I think the more complete story is that they met and it was a ruse and they didn't talk about Mrs. Clinton.
And you think it's insignificant that he had a secret meeting with a Russian delegation for the purpose of getting dirt on Hillary Clinton, and the only disappointment expressed in that meeting was that the dirt they got wasn't better. You don't think that's significant?
I don't think that that was a well-advised thing to do.
Not well-advised.
Right.
Wow, that's the understatement of the year. So you think it's perfectly appropriate or maybe just ill-advised for a presidential campaign to secretly meet with a Russian delegation to get dirt on their opponent? You would merely say that's inadvisable?
Yeah, if you're asking me what I do, I hope I wouldn't do it, but it was not illegal. It was stupid, foolish, ill-advised.
Well, it is illegal to conspire to get incriminating opposition research from a hostile government that is of financial value to a campaign. Wouldn't that violate campaign laws?
I don't know all those facts to be true.
Well, your report, Mr. Durham, doesn't dispute anything Mueller found, did it?
No, our object, our aim was not to dispute Director Mueller. I have the greatest regard, highest regard for Director Mueller. He's a patriot.
The only distinguishment between his investigation and yours is he refused to bring charges where he couldn't prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and you did. I yield back.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Durham, many of my MAGA colleagues want you to be someone who you are not and to say something that you clearly won't. And so I want to just start by thanking you for your many years of service to our country as a federal prosecutor. I want to talk a little bit more about the independence of a special counsel and just clarify, you did send multiple texts to the Attorney General after you were appointed as special counsel. Did you ever text message with Attorney General Garland once he took over as Attorney General?
No, Attorney General Garland had me communicate through the principal Deputy Attorney General, Mr. Weinsheimer.
Did you ever travel overseas with Attorney General Garland?
No.
And,
I met with the Attorney General, but I didn't travel overseas with him.
and President Biden, through the Attorney General, could have had you removed, fired, is that right?
I'm sure he could have.
And you stayed on.
I completed my term as special counsel.
Was there anyone you wanted to indict that you were prohibited from indicting by Attorney General Garland?
No.
So if you wanted to, you could have indicted Hillary Clinton, but you never asked, is that right?
If I had the evidence, yeah, he could have, for sure.
If you wanted to indict President Biden, you could have asked, right?
Yeah, that was not part of our mission. We weren't really looking at that, but
If you could have indicted Director Comey, you could have asked, is that right? And you didn't.
yeah, the Attorney General Garland had never asked me not to indict somebody.
Great. So I just want to make it clear to my colleagues, you had all the power in the world to indict anyone that you had evidence to indict, and you were never blocked from doing it. That's correct?
That's correct.
I also want to compare you to the last major special counsel investigation that we had. You agree Special Counsel Mueller charged dozens of individuals, and you indicted 3. Is that correct?
Indicted 2, and a third pleaded guilty.
Right. And Special Counsel Mueller had dozens of convictions, some at trial, but no defendant was outright acquitted. Is that right in the Mueller investigation? Outright acquitted. Across the board, every charge acquitted.
Right, I don't believe there are any acquittals. I'm not sure there were dozens of convictions. There were more than a dozen people who were indicted.
You were wise earlier to not weigh in on Donald Trump's character. You are under oath, after all. But did anything in your report prove false that Russians met with Trump's family during the campaign at Trump Tower after an offer of dirt on Hillary Clinton? Anything prove that that meeting didn't happen?
I don't have any evidence that that did not happen.
Anything in your report prove false that in the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump tried and concealed from the public a real estate deal he was seeking in Moscow?
I don't know anything about that. There's nothing in the report about it. It's not something we investigated.
Anything in your report prove false that Donald Trump publicly asked Russia to hack Hillary's emails and then hours later they did?
If you're referring to
Did Donald Trump not say at a press conference, Russia, if you're listening, you should get Hillary's emails? Did you prove that he didn't say that?
Yeah, no, we didn't.
Okay.
We didn't investigate.
Did you prove false in the 2016 campaign that Trump's campaign manager gave polling data to a spy for a Russian intelligence service?
We didn't investigate that.
Anything in your report say that Donald Trump in 2016 acted the way that Americans would want a presidential candidate to act with regard to Russia?
I'm sorry, could you repeat
Are
that?
you signing off on the way Donald Trump acted with Russia in 2016?
Yeah, our report doesn't address that.
And you agree that Russia interfered in the 2016 election?
I agree that there's substantial evidence to show that.
Thank you. Mr. Durham, my MAGA colleagues want you to be someone you're not, and they want you to say something you won't. They want you to join the law firm of Insurrection LLC, which incidentally and probably appropriately is chaired by a guy who never passed the bar exam, and you're wise not to do that. You see, my colleagues today, they are making themselves footnotes and foot soldiers in the history books that will chronicle Donald Trump's corruption. And I yield my remaining time to Mr. Schiff.
Mr. Durham, returning to your decision to speak out during the pendency of your investigation, did you have staff on your team advise you against making statements during the pendency of your investigation?
They didn't advise me either way, no.
Did any of your staff raise ethical concerns about your speaking out either in an interim report or after the Inspector General investigation? Any of your staff raise ethical concerns with your doing so?
Not that I recall, no. Raise a technical concern? No, not that I'm aware of.
Did they raise concerns with your speaking out during the pendency of the investigation?
Time of the gentleman has expired. The witness can respond.
I'm sorry.
Did any of your staff raise concerns about your speaking out during the pendency of your investigation in contrast to DOJ policy?
Not that I recall.
Thank you.
But the gentleman from California is recognized for 5.
Mr. Durham, several people today, including Ranking Member Madler and 3 representatives from California, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Swallwell, and Mr. Liu, have attacked you. Ranking Member Nadler called your report a political exercise with ethical ambiguity. Mr. Liu called you a partisan hack. However, it seems that they're taking issue not so much with the conclusions of your report as those of Mr. Mueller's report, which concluded that the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. That conclusion directly contradicted statements made on the record by those representatives. For example, Mr. Schiff in 2017-2018 made statements such as, the Russians offered help, the campaign accepted help, the Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help, and that is pretty damning. He also said there's clear evidence on the issue of collusion. He said, I think there's plenty of evidence of collusion or conspiracy in plain sight. Mr. Durham,
Will the gentleman yield?
are those statements supported by the conclusions of the Mueller
Will the
report?
gentleman yield?
No. Mr. Durham, are those statements supported by the Mueller report?
I don't believe so.
Mr. Nadler stated, it's clear that the campaign concluded and there's a lot of evidence of that. The question is, was the president involved? Mr. Nadler also said there was obviously a lot of collusion. Mr. Durham, were those statements supported by the Mueller report?
I don't believe they are supported by the Mueller report.
Mr. Liu stated in a press release in March of 2017, the bombshell revelation that U.S. officials have information that suggests Trump associates may have colluded with the Russians means we must pause the entire Trump agenda. We may have an illegitimate president of the United States currently occupying the White House. Mr. Durham, did the Mueller report establish that we had an illegitimate president occupying the White House?
Not to my knowledge.
Mr. Swallwell stated in 2018, in our investigation, we saw strong evidence of collusion. Did the Mueller report support that there was strong evidence of collusion?
Not to my knowledge.
Even here today, we had Mr. Schiff raise questions about your public statement during the investigation, saying this somehow violated a DOJ policy. However, Mr. Mueller himself made a public statement in January of 2019. This is an article from CNN, headline, Mueller's office disputes BuzzFeed report that Trump directed Michael Cohen to lie to Congress. So whatever policy there might exist in the DOJ with respect to public statements by special counsels, it would seem that you and Mr. Mueller would be on equal footing with respect to it. Is that correct?
It would seem so.
Mr. Nadler, Ranking Member Nadler also suggested that we're only here today because of the recent indictments of President Trump. However, you received your assignment as special counsel in 2019. Is that correct?
That's correct. 2020, the special counsel's in 2020.
In 2020. And was that before or after the events alleged in the recent indictments by the president?
That was before.
And is it customary for a special counsel to come testify in Congress upon the issuance of their report?
This is my first experience of this sort of thing. So I know that Director Mueller had occasion to testify before Congress, so I guess this is not unique.
So it's pretty likely you would have been here whether or not the president had been recently indicted.
Yes.
Contrary to Ranking Member Nadler's statement. I want to quote from you a part of your report where you say, there are reasons why in examining politically charged and high-profile issues, the office must exercise and has exercised special care. One of those statements you said is that even when prosecutors believe that they can obtain a conviction, there are some instances in which it may not be advisable to expend government time and resources on a criminal prosecution, particularly where it could create the appearance, even if unfounded, that the government is seeking to criminalize the behavior of political opponents or punish the activities of a specific political party or campaign. Could you just expound on that a little bit, this idea that there are prudential considerations that may counsel against prosecution, even if there has been some technical violation of a statute?
Sure. The standard principles of federal prosecution include, kind of as a bedrock, that you ought not to bring a prosecution unless you believe in good faith that there's sufficient evidence to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, and the jury will convict, and that a conviction can be sustained on appeal. There may be those instances in which you're pretty well convinced that a crime was committed and can identify the person who committed it, but you can't in good faith say a jury is likely to convict in this case. We believe that a jury will convict and that we can sustain it on appeal. Those are the principles that we tried to apply here, that we followed here. They're the same principles I've followed for 40 years as a federal prosecutor.
But what are you referring to when you say that there might be additional considerations involving the perception that you're criminalizing the behavior of political opponents?
Yeah, I mean, these are difficult things. For example, taking this case, I think all the members of the committee have had access to, whether they took advantage or not, I don't know, but we filed a classified appendix here, right? So there are some prosecutions where it may very well be that it looks like, and you think you can prove the crime beyond a reasonable doubt, but because of the classified nature of much of your evidence, it's never going to see the light of day. So that might preclude a prosecution. You know, things of that sort come up that are part of the prudential judgment that a prosecutor has to make in these matters.
I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Durham, I thank you for being here today, and thank you for your tireless work on this, as you called it, a very sobering report. The American people were forced to endure years of the Trump-Russia probe, and for what? I'll tell you why. It's because my Democrat colleagues across the aisle, the Clintons, the dishonest mainstream media, and the rest of the deep state have been terrified of Donald Trump from the beginning. And their hatred and fear remains today. From the 34-count felony indictment from the radical DA in Manhattan to the most recent 37-count felony indictment in Mar-a-Lago, they just won't stop. They won't stop. Mr. Durham, I want to walk through a few things for the American people in this 300-page report on Crossfire Hurricane. For those that are watching who don't know, this was the code name for the investigation undertaken by the FBI into whether the Trump campaign was coordinating with Russia to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. Mr. Durham, it says on page 9, at the direction of FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe and FBI Deputy Assistant Director for Counterintelligence Peter Strzok, Crossfire Hurricane was opened immediately. Is that correct?
That's correct.
First, let's talk about who these two characters were. On page 9 of your report, it says Strzok and Deputy Director McCabe's special assistant had pronounced hostile feelings toward Trump. In text messages before and after the opening of Crossfire Hurricane, the two had referred to him as loathsome, an idiot, Donald Trump, an idiot, someone who should lose to Clinton 100 million to 0, and Strzok once wrote, "Will stop," meaning Trump, from becoming president. So here we have these two leaders in the FBI, Strzok clearly expressing his hatred towards Trump from the beginning, opening an investigation 6 months before the 2016 election. And where are these two guys now? McCabe, he's been a contributor at CNN, the Clinton News Network, since 2019, and Strzok is an expert on the Mar-a-Lago raid. Strzok is an expert on the Mar-a-Lago raid, both continuing to dispel lies to the American people. On page 10 in your report, within days after opening Crossfire Hurricane, the FBI opened full investigations on members of the Trump campaign team. The FBI then began working on requests of the use of FISA authorities against Carter Page. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Folks, let me highlight who this American hero is. Carter Page was painted as an alleged Russian agent. Carter Page served his nation honorably. He was a Naval Academy graduate, and the FBI spied on Carter Page through the use of FISA authority. Sir, do you believe that this FISA warrant against Carter Page was flawed?
Yes.
Mr. Durham, Section 702 of FISA expires this year, and I'm sure you're familiar with FISA and Section 702. Just for the people listening at home, FISA stands for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which was created in 1978. In 2008, FISA 702 was added. Section 702 was created for us to have the authority to spy on non-U.S. citizens, Mr. Durham, we all know that Carter Page is an American citizen who served his nation honorably, and yet the FBI conducted surveillance, including wiretaps, based on falsified information provided by agents in the FBI. Mr. Page was an honest American, innocent man. Mr. Durham, the FBI obviously abused its FISA authority. They went after Carter Page, and it is my intent, and I hope the intent of my colleagues, that we do not reauthorize Section 702 because the FBI cannot be trusted. Finally, I want to talk about Charles Dolan and Mr. Danchenko, who was the main source of the Steele dossier. Dolan had played multiple roles in the Democrat National Committee, Democrat Party. He worked on both Clinton campaigns, Bill and Hillary. He was working with them, friends. On page 15 of your report, it says that in the summer and fall of 2016, Dolan and Danchenko traveled to Moscow in connection with a business conference. The business conference was held at the Ritz-Carlton in Moscow, which, according to the Steele reports, was allegedly the site of salacious sexual conduct on the part of Trump. Parents, if you're watching, earmuffs for your kids now, folks. Put earmuffs for your children. Mr. Durham, was this salacious sexual conduct? What is that?
The allegation was that...
Okay, don't answer it, I will.
Okay.
Think about this, America. In the game of politics, it gets dirty and nasty. And the people will say anything to beat their opponent. But this is the government doing it. Even the director of the FBI, Comey, said, it's possible Trump was with hookers peeing on each other. Christopher Steele said an infamous Trump pee tape probably exists. Alleged pee tape incident was the only sex Trump party in Russia. You want to irritate the suburban mom at home? 5 months before an election, tell them the Republican leading candidate is peeing on prostitutes. We are aware of the member of this committee having an alleged affair with a Chinese spy, I refer to as Yum Yum, but this is a new low for anyone, and I would hope Mr. Swallwell would agree with me. Imagine if somebody would have said and taken it this step further, Mr. Swallwell was peeing on Yum Yum.
Time of the gentleman.
It's unacceptable. This has got to stop. The FBI needs to...
Time of the gentleman has expired.
I yield back.
All right, I want to yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Schiff.
Mr. Durham, did you seek communications pertaining to someone named Mr. Bernard from a federal district judge?
I'm not, assuming that prosecutors go to judges for certain kinds of orders, they are typically sealed proceedings. I'm not speaking
Did you seek an order
direct to your
to
question, but I'm not going to comment on anything that I believe is under seal.
Did you seek a court order to obtain personal communications pertaining to Mr. Bernard?
I'm not going to speak beyond the report on that point, and I'm not going to violate any
Were you-
sealing orders.
I don't think it violates any sealing orders to tell us if you sought personal communications by court order. Did you?
Again, it's beyond the report.
Well, let's not even
Subject
make it
to sealing
specific to a
orders.
person. Did you seek court orders to obtain particular records, and were you denied by the judge?
I think the question is,
No,
intended
the
to
question is
suggest
what
that I don't want to
question is what
disclose something I'm
The question is what I
uncomfortable
asked you, Mr. Durham. You get to give the answer, not the question. The question is, did you seek a court order to get records from a judge pertaining to private communications, and were you turned down by the judge for lack of a sufficient basis?
And I've told you
Yes
that
or no?
It's beyond the report. I don't think I'm authorized to talk about it, and I'm not going to violate
It's
any
not beyond the
sealing orders.
report. It's not beyond the report.
Do you see anything in the report about that?
Yes. Did you seek an order, and were you turned down? And then did you seek to go around the court order by going to the grand jury?
No. You like to know what that was about?
What I would like to know, Mr. Durham, is did Mrs. Danahy, who resigned from your team, raise ethical concerns about your trying to go around the court order?
To my knowledge, no.
Then why did she leave?
I told you before, previously, that I have the highest regard for Ms. Danahy. Ms. Danahy and I are friends. Ms. Danahy, like everybody...
You know why she left, right?
I'm not
You do
sure
know the
why
answer
she
to the
left.
question. You know why she left, right?
Time of the gentleman has expired.
I'd also yield the balance of my time to the chairman.
I appreciate the gentleman for yielding. So Danchenko is the primary subsource. A few years before he does this work, he was investigated by the FBI for espionage. Is that right, Mr. Durham?
Correct.
And that case was halted because the FBI thought he left the country, right?
Correct.
Had he left the country?
No.
Where was he living?
He remained living in the place that he was living when they opened the investigation.
Right here in D.C., right?
Yeah.
He hadn't left anywhere. He's right here in D.C., and we're going to stop this. And then they go hire him, use the tax money of the people I get the privilege of representing to pay this guy who they obviously knew was a Russian spy. They hire him, who's the source of all the false information. Is that true?
They paid him, they hired him, and they paid him.
Couple $100,000 if I recall, right?
It was over $200,000.
Yeah, and then this guy is hanging out with Dolan, Charles Dolan, who's a buddy of the Clintons, who's also a source for the false dossier that was used to spy on an American citizen. He's hanging out with Dolan. In fact, don't they meet on a park bench somewhere in Arlington, Virginia on New Year's Day?
New Year's Day, middle of the
I mean,
day.
this is straight out of the movies, right? And the FBI says, but we're not going to talk to Charles Dolan. I mean, this is two of the dumbest things I've ever heard of. They won't talk, they pay a guy who's a Russian spy who's the source of the dossier. The other source of the dossier is Charles Dolan, who meets with that guy on a park bench in Arlington, and they don't want to interview him. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, but that's what Comey's FBI did. And they're still doing this kind of baloney because Mr. D'Antuono told us so, running operations, running investigations out of headquarters instead of assigning a U.S. attorney, a job you did for a long time and did very well. That is a huge problem. And your report, that's why your report's valuable.
I thank you for yielding. One of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle took issue with my saying that the Trump campaign invited Russian help, received Russian help, made use of it, and then lied about it. So let's break this down. Let's go to invited Russian help. Mr. Durham, you're aware of Donald Trump's public statements along the lines of, hey, Russia, if you're listening, hack Hillary's emails, you'll be richly rewarded by the press. You aware of that?
I'm aware of that.
And are you aware that Mueller found that hours after he made that plea for Russian help, the Russians, in fact, tried to hack one of the email servers affiliated with the Clinton campaigner family?
If that happened, I'm not aware of that. I mean, it could very well.
You're not aware of that in the Mueller report? So when you say you're not aware of evidence of collusion in the Mueller report, it's because you apparently haven't read the Mueller report very well. If you're not aware of that fact. But let me ask you about something else.
Sure.
Don Jr., when offered dirt as part of what was described as a Russian government effort to help the Trump campaign, said, if it's what you say, I love it. Would you call that an invitation to get Russian help with dirt on Hillary Clinton?
The words speak for themselves, I suppose.
I think they do. And in fact, he said, especially late in summer. Late in summer was around when the Russians started to dump the stolen emails, wasn't it?
Late in the summer, there was information that was disclosed by WikiLeaks in mid to late July. I think there had been some in June, and then there was maybe some later in October, was it? I think, but don't hold me to those dates.
And this gets to the receipt of help. The second thing I mentioned, receiving Russian help. The dumping of those emails, by the way, just as forecast by what Papadopoulos told the Australian diplomat, that is that the Russians would help by leaking dirt anonymously through cutouts like WikiLeaks and DC Leaks.
I don't think that's exactly what he told the Australians, but.
Well, he said that he was informed that the Russians could help by anonymously releasing this information, right?
Release what?
By anonymously releasing information damaging to Hillary Clinton, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you read what's in the cable and what's in the report as to what the diplomats reported was there was a suggestion of a suggestion that the Russians could help. They had damaging information as to Mrs. Clinton. And
by releasing it anonymously, right? And that's exactly what happened, isn't it?
I don't.
You really don't know?
I'm not sure exactly. When you say exactly what happened.
Well, the Russians released stolen emails through cutouts, did they not?
There were emails.
It's a very simple question. Did they release information, stolen information through cutouts, yes or no?
Yeah, I'm not sure that.
You really don't know the answer to that? The answer is yes, they did. Through DC Leaks.
Well, in your mind, it's yes.
Well, Mueller's answer was yes. More important than mine, Mueller's answer was yes. Now, that information, of course, was helpful to the Trump campaign, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question, but that the Russians intruded into,
I just want to
hacked into the systems, they released information.
And that was helpful to the Trump campaign, right?
And the conclusion in the ICA and in the Mueller investigation was that the Russians intended to assist.
Can you answer my question, Mr. Durham? That was helpful to the Trump campaign, right?
Yeah, that's.
And Trump made use of that, as I said, didn't he, by touting those stolen documents on the campaign trail over 100 times?
I said, I don't really read the newspapers or listen to the news. I don't
Really,
find all that reliable, so I don't know that.
Mr. Durham, were you totally oblivious to Donald Trump's use of the stolen emails on the campaign trail more than 100 times? Did
I'm
that
not aware of
escape
that.
your attention?
I am not aware of that.
Are you aware of the final prong that I mentioned, that he lied about it, that the Trump campaign covered it up? It's the whole second volume of the Mueller report. I hope you're familiar with that.
Yeah, that's a section of the report, the second volume, relating to what their obstruction of justice.
Well, thank you for confirming what my Republican colleague attacked me about. Now, he also criticized the use of the word collusion, apparently giving private polling data to the Russians while the Russians are helping your campaign. They don't want to call collusion. Maybe there's a better name for it. Maybe they would prefer we just call it good old-fashioned GOP cheating with the enemy. Maybe that would be a little bit more accurate description.
Yeah.
Because this is what happened, but they seem allergic to calling it for what it is. I yield back. The term DOJ policy provides that you don't speak about a pending investigation, and yet you did, didn't you?
I'm not exactly sure what you're referring
When
to.
the Inspector General issued a report saying that the investigation was properly predicated, you spoke out in violation of Department of Justice policy to criticize the Inspector General's conclusions, didn't you?
I issued a public statement. I didn't do it anonymously. I didn't do it through third persons. There were
Nonetheless, you violated department policy by issuing a statement while your investigation was ongoing, didn't you?
I don't know that. If I did, then I did, but I was not aware that I was violating some policy.
And you also sought to get the Inspector General to change his conclusion, did you not? When he was concluding that the investigation was properly predicated, did you privately seek to intervene to change that conclusion?
This is outside the scope of the report, but if you want to go there, we asked the Inspector General to take a look at the intelligence that's included in the classified appendix that you looked at, and said that that ought to affect portions of his report.
And you thought it was appropriate for you to intervene with an independent investigation by the Inspector General because he was reaching a conclusion you disagreed with. You thought that was appropriate.
That's not, the premise isn't right. The Inspector General circulated a draft memo to a number of agencies and persons. Our group was one of them. We were asked to review that draft and bring to his attention any concerns that we had or disagreements.
And when he
Time of the gentleman-
refused to
time of the
change
gentleman
his,
has-
when
time of the
he
gentleman has
refused to
expired.
change his report,
Time of the gentleman's
you
expired.
violated
Mr.
department
Chairman, I
policy.
insist on regular order.
Well, it's not even his time, it's Ms. Lofgren's time, so the gentleman yields back to Ms. Lofgren, who's not here, so the time has expired. Mr. Durham, in the summer of 2016, did our government receive intelligence that suggested Secretary Clinton had approved a plan to tie President Trump to Russia?
Yes.
Was that intelligence important enough for Director Brennan to go brief the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the Attorney General of the United States, and the Director of the FBI?
Yes.
And was that intelligence put then into a memorandum, a referral memorandum?
Yes.
And was that memorandum then given to Director Comey and Agent Strzok?
That's who it was addressed to, yes.
Did Director Comey share that memorandum with the FISA court?
I'm sorry, can
Did
you?
he share that memorandum with the FISA court? Did Director Comey do that?
I'm not aware of that if he did.
Did he share it with the lawyers preparing the FISA application?
Not to my knowledge.
Did he share it with the agents on the case, working the Crossfire Hurricane case?
No.
Didn't share it with the agents on the case. Can you tell the committee what happened when you took that referral memo and shared it with one of those agents, specifically Supervisory Special Agent Number 1?
We interviewed the first supervisor of the Crossfire investigation, the operational person. We showed him the intelligence information. He indicated he had never seen it before. He immediately became emotional, got up and left the room with his lawyer, spent some time in the hallway, came back.
He was ticked off, wasn't he?
Yes.
He was ticked off because this is something he should have had as an agent on the case. It's important information that the director of the FBI kept from the people doing the investigation.
The information was kept from him.
Who's Charles Dolan?
Charles Dolan is a public relations person here in Washington, D.C. He had prior involvement, professional involvement with Russian government, representing Russian government interests. He was a person that was associated with Igor Danchenko.
He was also buddies with the Clintons, wasn't he?
He had held positions when President Clinton was president.
In their campaign advisory to Secretary Clinton's presidential campaign, executive director of the Democrat Governors Association, that's the same Charles Dolan we're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, and wasn't he also a key source for information in the dossier?
He provided some information that was included in the
Ritz-Carlton
dossier, yes.
stuff, the Manafort stuff. In the Crossfire Hurricane investigation and the Mueller investigation, when the FBI interviewed Mr. Dolan, what did he have to say?
To my knowledge, they didn't interview Mr. Dolan.
They didn't interview this guy? Source for the dossier, key information in the dossier, buddies with the Clintons, and they didn't talk to him?
No, I mean, we report on that because even Christopher Steele in October 2016 identified Dolan as somebody that might have information.
I find it interesting they didn't talk to him. Were there agents on the case who wanted to talk to Mr. Dolan, Mr. Durham?
Yes.
What happened to analyst number one? She kept pushing to talk to Mr. Dolan. She was ultimately turned down. What happened to her the day that she was turned down and said, no, we're not talking to Dolan? What happened to her?
At about the same time, she was assigned to a different project.
They moved her. They said, we can't have this. We can't have that. We can't be looking into the Clintons' buddy, a key source for the dossier. They reassigned her. And then what did she do?
She memorialized it.
She entered a memo to the file because she said, at some point the inspector general is going to want to know this information. I'm going to make sure it's recorded contemporaneously. She put it in the file. It's crazy. They didn't talk to the key source. They kept key intelligence from the investigators. This is how bad this investigation was. But here's the scary part. I don't think anything has changed. The day your report came out, 5 weeks ago, May 15th, you got a letter, Mr. Durham, addressed to you from the general counsel at the FBI, Mr. Jason Jones, writes you this 6-page letter, and he says, not to worry, everything is fine. It's all been worked out at the FBI. He even says on page 2, he says, had the reforms implemented by current FBI leadership, summarized below, been in place in 2016, failures detailed in your report never would have happened, and he underlines it. He said this would never happen because of the reforms we implemented in 2019 and 2020. And then he says on page 4, one of the specific reforms, he says, FBI executive management has instructed investigations should be run out of the field and not from the headquarters. That statement is not true. 5 weeks ago, the FBI wrote you and said everything has changed when in fact it hasn't, and a statement in there is absolutely false, and we know it's false because 2 weeks ago today, we interviewed Stephen D'Antuono, former head of the Washington field office, Mr. Durham, and here's what he said in his transcript. Head of the Washington field office, when the Trump classified document investigation began, he said, that case was handled differently than I would have expected it to be, than any other cases handled. We learned a lot of stuff from Crossfire Hurricane, that headquarters should not work the investigation. It's supposed to be the field offices. My concern is that the Department of Justice was not following these principles. Nothing is, and that's the thing that scares me the most. Nothing has changed. Mr. Durham, let me just finish with this. 60% of Americans now believe there's a double standard at the Justice Department. You know why they believe that? Because there is. That has got to change. And I don't think more training, more rules is going to do it. I think we have to fundamentally change the FISA process, and we have to use the appropriations process to limit how American tax dollars are spent at the Department of Justice. I yield back.
Mr. Durham, this seems to all started with one person, but I don't see his name in your report. I see it in Mueller's report 89 times. Who did Mr. Papadopoulos meet with that gave him this supposed Russian information?
When Mr. Papadopoulos was interviewed by the FBI, he had identified Joseph Mifsud as a person who had provided him that information.
Did you interview Joseph Mifsud?
We attempted to interview him. We pursued every lead that we had. We talked to a lawyer that he had in Europe, but we never were able to actually make contact with him so we could interview him.
Do you think he's a Western source? Is he associated with Western intelligence?
It's hard to say who Mr. Mifsud is associated with. He was tied up with Link University, Mr. Scotti, who had involvement in the Italian government, and they were acquainted. Hard to say who Mifsud.
I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Gates.
Hard to say who Mifsud is. He's the guy who started the whole thing. We've known it for years. Go ahead and play the video.
When the special counsel's office interviewed Mifsud, did he lie to you guys too?
Can't get into that.
Did you interview Mifsud?
Can't get into that.
Is Mifsud Western intelligence or
Can't get
Russian
into that.
intelligence?
Can't get into that.
Well, I'm reading from your report. Mifsud told Papadopoulos tells the diplomat tells the FBI opens the investigation July 31st, 2016, and here we are 3 years later, July of 2019, the country's been put through this, and the central figure who launches it all lies to us, and you guys don't hunt him down and interview him again, and you don't charge him with a crime. Maybe a better course of action is to figure out how the false accusation started. Maybe it's to go back and actually figure out why Joseph Mifsud was lying to the FBI. And here's the good news. Here's the good news. That's exactly what Bill Barr's doing. And thank goodness for that. That's exactly what the Attorney General and John Durham are doing.
Well, Mr. Durham, was that what you were doing?
I'm sorry, is that what?
Was finding out who Mifsud was what you were doing?
We pursued that avenue, yes.
Right, but was he, this whole thing was an op, Mr. Durham. This wasn't like a bumbling, fumbling FBI that like couldn't get FISA straight. They ran an op. So who put Mifsud in play? You don't know, do you?
I do not know that. I can't give you the
For
answer.
years, you had years to find out the answer to what Mr. Jordan said was the seminal question, and you don't have it. And it just begs the question whether or not you were really trying to find that out. Because it's one thing to criticize the FBI for their FISA violations, to write a report. They've been criticized in plenty of reports. Some have referred to your work as just a repackaging and regurgitation of what the Inspector General already told us. So if you weren't going to do what Mr. Jordan said you were going to do in that video and give us the basis for all of it, what's this all been about?
Well, I'm not exactly sure the import of your question. If your question is, did we try to locate and interview Mr. Mifsud, the answer is yes.
Why didn't you subpoena
We expended,
Wait, why didn't you subpoena him to a grand jury?
I'm sorry, why not?
Why didn't you send him a grand jury subpoena?
Mr. Mifsud? You'd have to find Mr. Mifsud before you could serve a grand jury subpoena on him.
You guys were out in Italy. Was it you and Bill Barr looking for authentic pasta over there, or Mifsud?
No, we not. We were looking for information that might help us locate Mifsud.
But you know who I think could probably locate him? The features of Western intelligence and possibly our own government that put him in play. Like, your report seems to be less an indictment of the FBI and more of an inoculation, lowercase I, of course. And like many inoculations, it may have worse consequences down the road. We'll have some time to discuss this matter further, but it's just hard to like pretend as though this was a sincere effort when you don't get to the fundamental thing that started the whole deal. I yield back.
I was away from my family for 4 years, essentially doing this investigation is, my view, is a sincere effort. The fact that you can't find somebody overseas should not come as a big surprise.
Could you find out?
Reclaiming my time, is he alive or dead?
We don't know.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Durham, isn't it true that Danchenko admitted that information he provided to Christopher Steele in June of 2016 was, quote, rumor and speculation?
Correct.
And Danchenko himself estimated that he was responsible for 80% of the intelligence and 50% of the analysis in the Steele dossier. Is that right?
That's correct.
Do you agree with his assessment or his estimate of his participation in the dossier?
Yeah, we have no reason to doubt that. I mean, Steele identified him as the primary subsource or the principal source of the information.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Steele used that rumor and speculation to build his dossier, and we've wandered all over this. There's none of those statements were corroborated at all, and yet Danchenko's reputation for veracity was considered bad. He was considered a boastful man who had low credibility, right?
There was information that the Bureau had along those lines, yes, sir.
Yeah. And in fact, when he lost his visa, his work permit, he used a Russian business as a front to basically fraudulently get a visa to work in the United States. Is that right? Page 128 of your report.
Yeah, he went to work for a company in the United States, and Steele was paying him through a cutout through that company in the United States.
Yeah, most of us who look at that area of the law regularly, like I do, would say that's immigration fraud. So, and it's also true, we talked about this, it's true, there was an FBI counter-espionage investigation into Danchenko 2009 to 2011, and that was a result of him approaching a Brookings Institution co-worker trying to essentially solicit espionage on behalf of the Russian government. And then, even though the Washington field office is right there and he lived just a few miles from the Washington field office, the case was closed on Mr. Danchenko, that investigation, right?
The Danchenko investigation is being done by Baltimore, the Baltimore field office, but that's right, he stayed where he
Nonetheless, he lived around, I live out there, I know, I live around the corner from there. So let's take a look let's boil this down. After determining that nothing that Danchenko told Steele could be verified, it was all a pack of lies and innuendo and rumor, after further determining that he had attempted to solicit espionage for Russia, and he had himself been a subject of an investigation by the Bureau, and after having committed immigration fraud, the FBI hired him on as an informer and paid him $220,000 and proposed an additional $300,000 to be paid to him. Now that's your testimony, that's in the report, it's all there. And that's even after the Validation Management Unit had determined that Danchenko was a concern and likely had connections to Russian intelligence. That's in your report as well.
Correct.
And very special agent Helson knew most of these facts, but continued to endorse Danchenko's recruitment and payment as a confidential human source, right?
That's correct.
So I'm going to give you these things, and I think you understand why so many of us are underwhelmed with some of your recommendations about FBI, but overwhelmed by what's gone on here. The FISA application, we've talked about that, where that came from. We talked about that the FBI has conducted millions of unconstitutional backdoor FISA 702 searches. Disparate treatment of Hillary Rodham Clinton, which you discuss in your report. The sweetheart Hunter Biden plea deal that would send normal Americans to jail for years, he's getting nothing. We have 50 intelligence officers signing onto a letter stating they would rather have a job in the Biden administration than tell the truth to the American people. The Hunter Biden laptop suppression, the DOJ targeting parents at school board meetings, a federal prosecutor setting a quota, essentially, on additional January 6th individuals. He said he's got to get 2,000 more. That's a quota. That's a bounty. DHS targeting Catholics at church. Hoaxes villainizing border agents while the border itself is under attack. That's all from this agencies. And I understand that you're loyal to your institution. I get that. But Ms. Sparks gave an excellent enumeration of all the things that you found in your report. And that's why people like me, and I don't want to speak for anybody else on here, we're baffled, just utterly baffled that more people have not been held accountable for their crimes. Because these are crimes. What's gone on in this country, the division in this country today, I can trace back to one thing. It isn't Trump going down the escalator. It is the Steele dossier paid for by Hillary Clinton through the cutouts, and that's caused the division in this country today. I yield back.
Witness can respond.
I'm not sure there was a question at the end.
Okay. I know, I'm just giving you
I
opportunity
was gonna, I didn't get there.
Yeah. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Biggs. You've given us testimony today that you're disappointed that the FBI didn't cooperate more, right? That was your testimony.
Said that.
Yeah, so we're disappointed too, but the difference is when regular folks do things that are wrong and unlawful, there's typically greater effort to try to get those people before a grand jury to utilize criminal process where appropriate, not for other purposes. And it's just like, oh, well, Bill Priestep, the guy who might have set this whole op in motion, he just didn't want to talk to you about certain things, and you were real accommodating to that. And then Mifsud, the person who juices Papadopoulos to create this predicate that you find improper. You guys, I mean, did you ever know who his lawyer was, Mifsud's lawyer?
Talked to his lawyer in Europe. I don't know if
So wait, you could
represented
find the guy's
United
lawyer,
States.
but you couldn't find him?
We contacted somebody that we knew had represented him in a part of the effort to try to locate him.
And you got the lawyer. And then now you're sitting here in front of the judiciary saying you could find the guy's lawyer, but you couldn't effectuate the service of a subpoena because you couldn't find him?
Well,
do you know how
first of all,
silly that sounds?
as you may or may not know, we wouldn't have the authority to serve a subpoena overseas. The lawyer didn't know where Mifsud was. He was in communication with him, but he claimed not to know where he was. and we are trying to arrange an opportunity to talk to Mifsud.
Did you take possession of 2 BlackBerry phones from Mifsud in any way?
There were phones that were provided to us by
So you could find the
Mifsud's
phones, but
lawyer.
not the guy.
Correct?
Do you see how silly this looks? Like you found the lawyer, you found the phones, but the actual dude who got ordered by Western intelligence to go start this thing you couldn't find? It's kind of laughable. It seems like more than disappointment. It seems like you weren't really trying to expose the true core of the corruption. That you were trying to go at it another way.
Yeah. As we said in the report, and as I said in my opening remarks, we pursued the facts as best we could.
Well, how about
given
this
the tools
fact?
that we have?
Okay, how about this fact, Mr. Durham? The entire Mueller team does a hard reset on their Apple phone in synchronization to wipe away evidence. Did you investigate that?
I've read that.
Well, why did you investigate it? Who gave the order on the Mueller team to wipe the phones?
Yeah, that was not something that we were asked to look at, and we didn't.
No,
look
that's
at
not true, Mr. Durham. That is not true, because I'm holding the document that authorizes your activity, and it specifically says the investigation of Special Counsel Robert Mueller. It's in Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record the order that says that you're supposed to investigate these things. And so, like, whether it's the Mueller team, Mifsud, how about Azra Turk? Azra Turk, what's Azra Turk's real name? Do you know that?
I'm not going to be disclosing the names of FBI personnel that are otherwise unavailable.
But an FBI, so the FBI sends somebody to go honeypot George Papadopoulos. Who gave the order to do that?
I think that's beyond the scope of what's in the report.
It's literally the scope of what your charging order is. Who put it in motion? We get after it was put in motion, the FBI did a bunch of wrong and corrupt things. Totally understand, we're trying to deal with that. But when you are part of the cover-up, Mr. Durham, then it makes our job harder.
Yeah, well, if that's your thought, I mean, there's no way of dissuading you from that. I can tell you that it's offensive, and that the people who worked on this investigation have spent their lives trying to protect the people in this country and pursue within the law
You went
what it is that we are
Mr. Durham.
authorized
Wait,
to
hold on.
do.
You tried 2 cases, lost both of them, and then the one guilty plea you got, Kleinsmith is back to practicing law in Washington, D.C. today.
Yeah, that's beyond my control.
Right, but the fact that you allowed that plea to occur, right, and then the punishment was insufficient, the fact that you didn't charge Andrew McCabe, you didn't convict the lying Democrats or the lying Russians, you didn't investigate Mifsud or the Mueller probe, even though, as we sit here today in black letter, that was your charge. Have you ever heard of the Washington Generals?
The Washington Generals, yes.
Yeah, and they're the team that basically gets paid to show up and lose, right?
Well, I'm sure that the players who exert blood, sweat, and tears don't view it that way, but you might.
I think they do. I think they do, because the job of the Washington Generals is to show up every night and to play the Harlem Globetrotters. And their job is to lose.
I'm sorry, of a different, I was thinking of a different thing.
Yeah, so their job is to lose. And I'm kind of wondering, and it just seems so facially obvious that it's not what's in your report that's telling, it's the omission. It's the lack of work you did. And for the people like the chairman who put trust in you, I think you let them down. I think you let the country down. And you are one of the barriers to the true accountability that we need.
Do I get to respond to that or comment on that? Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've ever investigated a crime.
I don't know that you have. You didn't investigate these, Mr. Durham.
Whether or
How about
not,
Andy McCabe? Did you charge him? Did you investigate him?
Gentlemen, time has expired. The witness can respond, and then we'll move on to our last.
I don't know, sir, whether or not you've ever had occasion to try to investigate crimes under the rules and regulations and under the Constitution that we're bound by. We can gather evidence in particularly lawful ways. Can't charge people because we might think
It's not just
something.
that
We
you
can
didn't
charge
you didn't
people.
investigate.
Gentlemen's
You didn't
time.
investigate the Mueller team
Gentlemen's
wiping their
time.
phones, and you
Gentlemen's
won't tell
time.
us who gave the orders because you're protecting those people.
Gentlemen's time is